What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Royale YouTube channel. We are back with another strategy video. That's right. We're going to be going over Devy draft strategy. I don't think there's that many Devy draft strategy videos or content out there. There's a few articles and there's stuff in there, but I think the reality is when you're looking at strategy, we don't know, right? Like I think that if anybody's touting that their strategy is foolproof, they're full of shit. I spout a lot of stuff too in terms of strategy, but in reality, with college assets and college players, strategy can be tough. And I think we miss all the time. And I think that's one thing to be very cognitive of if you're going to play this format is that you're going to miss. And there's no foolproof method. And if anybody's out there touting you that they have a foolproof method, I'd be very, red flags would pop in my head of like, hey, I don't necessarily think that's true because we are going to miss guys. We're going to miss on all kinds of guys. Keishawn Butte, Zach Evans from this last class, Sean Tucker, right? So there's going to be misses. However, I do think there's strategies that you can implement in terms of trade value and understanding asset value when the windows are that are important too. Now, we're going to go over Devy strategy today, a little bit of everything today. I'm going to be showing you guys a mock draft that we recently did to kind of go over like context of it, diving into players. We're going to go over every position today of the strategy that you could use and then some general thoughts. So while the intro is going, hit that like and subscribe button. Then we'll be diving all into strategy and everything that you need to know for your Devy drafts. All right, let's get into it. And we're going to start with the quarterback position first. So when we're diving into what this quarterback position looks like, I think the number one thing people have done over the course of the last, I'd say 3 years, 2 to 3 years, there's been a shift at the quarterback spot, right? So before, people really were drafting quarterbacks high. And I think you can see that sometimes in newer Devy leagues and formats with maybe novices to the format, which is totally understandable. Devy quarterback in Superflex, you would expect them to go early. But what we have seen is that there's just been so many misses, right? DJU, Spencer Rattler, although there's a Rattler hive out there that think he can come back. Sam Howell. So realistically, I had shared a mock draft that happened a couple years ago, where DJU, Spencer Rattler, and Sam Howell are all top 4 picks in a Devy draft, right? So when you think of that draft capital that you're wasting on those guys that just didn't pan out, that hurts, right? So that's going to hurt your overall team, your depth, and everything in there. So for me, I'm going to avoid quarterback early. Now, I'm going to give you some options if you want to draft quarterback in the first 2 rounds, who those guys could be, but I'm going to avoid it early more than likely. Now, there's one outlier, Caleb Williams from USC, that you're probably not going to avoid if you have the 101. But if I'm sitting at the 102, I'd rather take a shot on Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Instead of maybe Drake May. And so that's kind of where that concept comes from. I think the second point is huge. No one knows how to evaluate these quarterbacks. Let's put it in perspective. We have scouts out there that make millions, or scouting departments that have millions, $1 million budgets out there, and these scouts that make thousands of dollars to scout one position, the quarterback position. Look how many misses they have. So if you're telling me that some guy like me who does a podcast in this little room I'm in knows more than those guys, you're just full of crap. Like you're a snake salesman, really. Like we could see the signs and we do our best and it's fun to do it. But the number one thing to evaluate quarterbacks is their brain, their head. What do they see? How do they read defenses? We're not in those rooms. We don't understand those coverages and everything that they're seeing and they're telling people, right? We may understand coverage, but we don't understand how they understand those coverages. So in reality, when you see Devy quarterback rankings, what are those? Where are those coming from? It's based on, expectations of that. And a lot of people are just doing scouting reports from other people, right? We're not in those rooms. We don't know what they go through. So that's just something to kind of know, right? Like no one knows how to evaluate these guys, even the top evaluators, talent evaluators. And then I think it's just too much risk based on capital, right? If you have a first round pick and you're taking a quarterback, now there are times where you can use that, right? So let me go through the 3 quarterbacks that I think are okay to draft right now in Devy. Caleb Williams, I think he's a smash. If there was ever a smash, it would be him. But you can tell I'm even nervous about that. I think Drake May is in that category. And that's really where I have it. Now, as far as like Drake May, when you're thinking of him, like I still think he needs to really step up. I do think that there are some red flags in his profile that he has to develop. We did a Drake May video Christian did on the channel. Go check it out. A full breakdown of him. Like he does have some areas to improve. I do still think drafting him is okay just because of the perceived draft value you have from him, right? The asset value. So that is where taking like a guy like Mayor Williams, you have very good asset value, right? I think Williams just went like the 7th overall quarterback in a super flex league. So there is value there. The third guy that I'll take a shot on is Drew Aller from Penn State. And the reason why is I believe in his tools and intangibles, but he's still going in that late second round. So you're not giving up elite draft capital, but you could still have him there. But there is that like, okay, when do you take him? Now, Drew is far from a smash pick either, right? So I'm not telling you that he's going to always hit. But I think for me personally in my rankings, when I'm looking at Drew Aller, I'll take a shot on that based on the perceived value and where he's still going in drafts. Now, next position, the running back draft strategy. Value those top end running backs. I think the problem with it this year, if you're in a Devy draft, I don't know how many top end guys there really are. We've talked about this on the channel. Me and Christian have talked about it too on our Patreon. You know, Travion Henderson, Nicholas Singleton, Raheem Sanders, those guys that are going in that first round, there's still a ton of question marks about every single one of them. So when you're saying value top end running backs, you're really saying value top end running backs who have elite value that you maybe can move, right? So I think with all the misses that we've seen at the running back position, with some of the draft capital that we've seen, I think it's fair to question like, hey, how many of these guys should you keep on your roster throughout the year, or you're going to move and shift and kind of get into contention range on the NFL side, right? So I think that's where you're looking at it from the running back perspective. I do aggressively rank freshman backs, so I don't mind taking a freshman back in the second round. If you can get him in the third, that's even better. I'm going to show you that mock draft here at the end of this video. So there is a chance you can grab some of these guys, but aggressively rank them, because what you'll see is Travion Henderson was going in some Devy circles like late second in when he came out before he was a freshman. And then last year he was going 102, 103, right? So you're going to see that value bump, right? You're going to see that with freshman backs. They always bump up. And it also, like, you know, one thing to know about Devy running backs is not a lot of them produce their freshman year. Some will definitely pop off. So people will forget about like Jam Miller and some of these other guys that have popped up were high-rated recruits. They just have it. They're in a tougher situation in some, like Quinshon Judkins and the other running backs. So don't give up on those guys either. I think that's another note. And then do not draft for need from the running back position. You trade for need. And this is how I think Devy teams can get in trouble. So imagine out there, if you're sitting at the 112 and you realize your NFL team needs a running back, and let's say you back to back you drafted Zach Evans, Sean Tucker. Hey, your NFL team still needs a running back, right? So do not draft for need. Only draft for value, best player available. Look at your Devy roster as an asset-based roster, not a filler, not a I talk about having like a minor league system, but it's not a minor league system to fill positions. It's to fill value for your NFL squad. Now, when I'm talking about those freshman running backs, Justice Haynes, Cedric Baxter, and Ruben Owens tend to be those top freshmen of this class. What I will say is this class is not as deep and not as high as some of the other classes that we've seen in terms of value. And I would say like Justice Haynes has the most value. That's why I'm going to put him first, not necessarily my rankings. If you go to my rankings on the Patreon, you can see all of that. But like perceived value, Justice Haynes could be up there, but he's in a tough running back market. I think with Tommy Reese there, he can get a little bit more run, but just know that Cedric Baxter has a really good opportunity. So does Ruben Owens. They could at least get out there on that field and really produce this year. So when you're thinking of like perceived value to what actually is going to be on the field, you could probably extrapolate some value from those guys. And that's something to look about when you're thinking of the running back position. Now, wide receiver, build through elite wide receivers. This is really the dynasty queue. This is what everybody's doing in dynasty. And I think it needs to start shifting to Devy, right? Marvin Harrison Jr., you're seeing a lot of the Devy wide receivers that people have touted. They hit a lot more. I think we're better at evaluating wide receivers. We know when understanding NFL drafting trends, right? So that's my third bullet on there. Guys like, Xavier Worthy are less risk now because we just saw Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Josh Downs get the draft capital that we like. And some got first round capital, right? We love that Zay Flowers is in that. I talked about Zay Flowers 3 years ago as being probably a sleeper, and then he was, right? And so we've seen the drafting trends of wide receivers and smaller elite wide receivers. So guys like Xavier Worthy, Evan Stewart, some of these other guys, I think they're safer bets now because we see the NFL trending that way. My big thing too is, avoid G5 receivers transfers. At no point should some G5 receivers go into the first 3 rounds, right? Like group of 5 receivers from outside the Power 5 conferences. The hit rate on those guys just don't work. Then you're going to see some G5 receivers transfer. This is hard for me because I like Jacob Cowing, who plays at Arizona. Some of these other guys that could see that, value bump. He's one of those guys, but I feel like those are outliers, right? I hear Jay Stein, who works for our Patreon and goes through there, just yelling at me about he's too old, right? And so that kind of talks to me a little bit. But we overvalue those G5 guys. I think part of the reason why is a lot of people play like college fantasy or C2C leagues, and they know that, oh my gosh, Devontae Walker, some of these other guys, Franklin or Tej Johnson, they look great, playing against Troy in the Sun Belt or whatever the case may be. But when they go to, Power 5, they struggle. And we've seen that consistently with a lot of these guys. Ali Jennings is another one going to Virginia Tech. And so we think that production is going to carry over, and it's just not. It won't carry over for the most part. And their draft capital also gets hit. So be very careful with G5 receivers, especially transfers, right? Big one is Jalen Tolbert. A lot of people were on Jalen Tolbert. I even said, hey, Jalen Tolbert's profile looks really good. He hasn't done anything in the NFL, and he might not be on the Dallas roster, right? As the season approaches, there's still hope. But again, you invested what kind of capital in that? So just go after those elite guys and look for those 5 stars and 4 stars at maybe like a Texas or an Ohio State, always Ohio State. These schools that can produce those elite fantasy wide receivers don't reach on some of these other guys at other schools. Now, as far as like the big ones, when we're thinking of like Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, Xavier Worthy, I wanted to keep most of these in the 24 class. Marvin is a pretty much solid prospect. Emeka is one of those guys that some are really high on. Matt Ward, he's on our Patreon. He works for DFF. And a lot of other, in terms of like, he's one of the analytical guys I really like. He thinks Emeka could have a higher profile maybe than Olave, right, in that area. So if you like Emeka and Marvin Harrison, you're on board there. Xavier is one of those guys I think is going to shoot up a little bit more. I do think that weight doesn't concern me as much because I see the NFL trends. So other guys in that wide receiver realm, those are the first 3 that were taken in our draft that we did. But Evan Stewart's in there. Luther Burden, Jonte Cook was up there. Malik Neighbors is a name for some of you guys to know. So building through that wide receivers, and I will say this, it's much easier to trade Devy wide receivers than it is Devy running backs. A lot of guys fall in love with that wide receiver position because the dynasty stuff's trickling in now. As dynasty strategy trickles, so will Devy. It'll counterbalance each other. Now, Devy tight end draft strategy, I'll keep this simple. It's too unpredictable. Look for traits if you're looking for anything. So relative athletic score is obviously one of those things. It's a big reason why I was really high on Luke Musgrave. But in reality with tight ends, just avoid if possible. Even if it's a 2 tight end league, I don't like Brock is out there and I like Brock, but I think he's around that value, that 111 mark. If he's getting drafted higher than that, I'm a little concerned. I like those guys. It's too unpredictable. Look at Michael Mayer, Devy tight end 1 forever, tight end 3 off the board in the NFL draft. You see a guy like Sam Laporta who was left for dead, tight end 2 in the NFL draft, right? So to me, it's just too unpredictable. You could look for traits. And if you're in like a Devy, supplemental draft after you either drafted or your rookie draft, you're going to see the tight ends are always there. There are always tight ends in those drafts that you could draft and hope that gets tight end to production. And it is really easy to trade for tight end production in dynasty leagues, especially if they're like that second or third year, they haven't broken out yet. There's ways to kind of manipulate the market to help you. Now, as far as like the guys, in that 24 class, Brock, I think he's cleared it to a tier to himself. Jatavian Sanders is in there, but that's really a trait pick, not so much an asset pick. He went in the 4th round of a draft that we did. And then when you look at like Michael Trigg, I'm going to get hurt by Michael Trigg again, probably Ole Miss tight end. I like him. I think he has the tools. He is athletic. He has it. But, what is that draft capital going to be? I think that's the question. Now, some general rules as we kind of wrap this up. Avoid quarterback and tight end all you can, right? I just think that the perceived value you're getting from drafting those positions is not enough for you to waste high-end draft capital. Do not draft for team need. Draft best player available and use dynasty assets. Don't join a Devy league if you're not going to trade, because you need to be able to trade and turn your roster more in a Devy league than in a dynasty league. Collect Devy 3rds and 4ths. We're going to go through that, the 3rd and 4th round here, where the value is at. But there's a ton of value in those 3rd and 4ths, because in most Devy leagues, when you first start, especially in that 2nd round, you're going to see reaches on high-end college production guys, but not necessarily Devy NFL assets. And so that 3rd and 4th round is a fun little area, and they're the cheapest areas to kind of grab picks in. And then know your league mates, know what they like. There's going to be Devy managers that only want youth. There's going to be the only want veterans. understand what picks they want, where those picks are at, understand what players they target, have that spreadsheet of Devy managers in your league, and know that. You really need to do game theory with Devy more than anything, because these guys, it's all psychological. Also know, when you're looking at Devy leagues, everybody wants to be the smartest guy. Everybody wants to hit Javonte Williams before Javonte Williams is the good, when you're looking at draft capital, what he became, second round pick. So when you think of that, try to identify those managers that always want to prove that they're smarter than everybody else, and then target them in trades and move them and go win on the NFL side. There's so many nuances to the format. That's why I really do like it. I wanted to show you this before we get out of here. We did this. We do mocks in our Patreon a lot. So we did this mock. I've already highlighted it on the channel, but just to kind of go through with you, I'm going to kind of scroll so you can kind of see where everybody is at. The quarterback position, again, see Quinn Ewers right there is going at, in the first round. I worry about Quinn. You believe in Quinn being QB3, that's not a bad pick. But again, so if you take Quinn there, you're missing out on Brock, Evan Stewart, Braylon Allen, maybe Zachariah Branch, freshman from USC. So you have to be very cognitive of, if you take a quarterback early, you're going to miss on some of those position players. So they have to hit to kind of get your value back. And then you just keep going through. To show you that third and fourth round to kind of really highlight it, there's a lot of guys in here that can see value increases. Branson Robinson, Donovan Edwards, Antonio Williams, Justice Haynes, McMillan, Brandon Ennis, even Cade Klubnik there in the third, right? Those aren't bad picks. Mekhi Lemon. I think one guy to really, really highlight and to know, Katron Allen, he's getting drafted pretty late, third, fourth round. In this one, 311. I was going to take him at the 312. He's a really good Penn State running back. So just to show you guys where that value's at, I thought that was important to kind of note, just so you can go over your Devy league and you can pause it and kind of look there. Now, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I know Devy's not a format that everybody loves, but I do want to highlight some strategy videos for you out there for each position. Let me know in the comments, does this help you in your Devy leagues? Will this help you? If you have any questions, please do that. I'm gonna leave this video with our Patreon promo. We've had a ton of signups the last couple of weeks. We appreciate you guys. Go jump in. We have a bunch of stuff. Christian's going to let you know what we have. We'll see you guys next time.
Have you joined the Devy Royale's Patreon? With 3 tiers to cover your Devy, college football, and dynasty needs, the Devy Royale has a tier for you. Patrons in the day tier or higher get exclusive access to the rankings database, including consensus combined Devy and dynasty rankings, each analyst's personal rankings, and separated Devy and dynasty rankings for every type of fantasy football draft. Patrons in all tiers get access to the incredibly active Discord server, in which our community collectively helps each other win fantasy leagues and has fun in the process. Last but not least, all patrons in the day tier or higher get access to the College Football Manifesto, a more than 300-page document highlighting every Power 5 college football team, Devy players, mock drafts, strategy guides, position battles, and so much more. Head to patreon.com/the Devy Royale to join today.